Once, on a little farm nestled in a green valley, lived a husband and wife. The husband was strong and worked hard in the fields all day long. The wife was clever and worked hard in the house all day long. Their farm was small, but it was a happy place. They had a cozy cottage with a thatched roof, a sturdy red barn, and a few animals who were like family. There was a gentle cow, a plump pig, and a handful of clucking chickens. Every morning the sun would peek over the mountains and the rooster would crow, signaling the start of another busy day for the couple. They loved their life, but sometimes they forgot to see how hard the other person worked. One sunny morning, the husband came in from the fields for his breakfast. He stretched his arms and sighed a big, tired sigh. "Oh, my work is so hard," he said, sitting down at the wooden table. "I plough the fields and cut the hay. The sun beats down on my back. Your work inside the house is easy. It is just playing with the baby and stirring a pot." The wife, who had been up since dawn baking bread and milking the cow, put her hands on her hips. Her cheeks turned as red as the berries in the garden. She looked at her husband with wide, surprised eyes. She couldn't believe what she was hearing from him. "Easy!" she gasped, her voice full of disbelief. "My work is never done. I cook and clean and spin the wool. I churn the butter and watch our little baby. I feed the pig and chase the chickens. My work is from the moment the sun comes up until long after it goes down. You think your work is harder, but you have no idea what it takes to run this house." The husband just chuckled, shaking his head as if she were telling a silly story. He thought she was making a big fuss over nothing at all. He believed his job, the outside work, was the only truly difficult job on the farm. He was quite sure of it. The argument went back and forth like a game of catch. "My work is harder," the husband declared. "No, mine is," the wife insisted. The baby cooed in its cradle and the cat watched them from its spot by the warm fireplace, its tail twitching. Finally, the wife had a brilliant idea. A little smile played on her lips. "All right," she said, "if you think my work is so easy, then you can do it. Tomorrow, you will stay home and do my chores. I will go out to the fields and do your work. We will swap places for just one day, and then we will see whose work is truly harder." The husband laughed, a big, hearty laugh. He thought this was a wonderful joke. The next morning, the sun rose just as it always did. The wife woke up early, put on her husband's big work boots, and grabbed his scythe. She gave her husband a little pat on the cheek. "Good luck, my dear," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "Remember to churn the cream into butter and keep an eye on the baby, and don't forget to feed the pig." She walked out the door with a confident stride, heading toward the hayfield under the bright blue sky. She was ready for a day of fresh air and hard work in the sunshine. The husband watched her go, a smug look on his face. This was going to be the easiest day of his life. First, the husband decided he would churn the butter. It looked simple enough. His wife just pushed a stick up and down in a big wooden churn. He poured the rich yellow cream inside and started to push the handle. Plop, slosh, plop, slosh. He churned for a few minutes, but then he got thirsty. Making butter was boring work, he thought. He remembered they had a big barrel of sweet cider down in the cellar. "A little sip of cider will make this job go faster," he said to himself. He left the churn sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor and went down the stone steps into the cool, dark cellar. The baby, who had been sleeping peacefully in the cradle, suddenly woke up and began to cry. "Wah! Wah!" The husband heard the cries from the cellar. "Oh dear," he muttered, trying to hurry. He pulled the tap from the cider barrel, but he couldn't find the little wooden plug to put back in its place. The sweet, sticky cider started gushing out onto the cellar floor. He couldn't just leave it. So with the baby crying upstairs and the cider flowing downstairs, the husband put his thumb in the hole to stop the leak. He was stuck. He couldn't leave the cellar without making a huge mess. What a predicament he was in. Now the husband was in a real pickle. He was trapped in the cellar with his thumb in the cider barrel. The baby was crying louder and louder in the kitchen. He knew he had to do something, and fast. He shouted for help, but only the chickens in the yard could hear him. He thought and thought. If only he could be in two places at once. He felt very foolish standing there while his wife's easy day was already turning into a complete and utter disaster. He was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, her work was not as simple as it looked from the outside. He sighed a great big sigh of frustration. Finally, the husband remembered the cream he had left in the churn upstairs. "I can't just stand here all day," he thought. He decided he had to bring the churn down to the cellar. That way he could churn the butter while he kept his thumb in the cider barrel. It seemed like a very clever idea at the time. With great effort, he managed to let go for just a second, run upstairs, grab the heavy churn, and wobble back down the steps without spilling too much cider. He set the churn down on the cellar floor and got back to his two jobs, one hand churning, one thumb plugging the barrel. Just as he started his sloshing, again he heard a new sound from the kitchen. It was a happy snorting and a loud slurping. Oink, oink, slurp. The farm pig had wandered into the house through the open door. It had found the butter churn that the husband had forgotten to close properly. The pig stuck its snout right into the churn and began to drink the delicious creamy mixture. The husband heard the noise and groaned. He couldn't leave the cellar to shoo the pig away. All he could do was listen as his butter-to-be became the pig's breakfast. His clever plan was not working out at all. This was too much for the husband. He was tired of the cellar. He was tired of the crying baby. And he was very, very angry with the pig. He finally found the plug for the cider barrel, jammed it in and ran up the stairs. The pig, its snout covered in cream, looked up at him with a guilty expression and then trotted out of the house. The kitchen was a mess. There was no butter and the baby was still wailing. The husband picked up the baby and tried to soothe it, but the baby just cried harder. The morning was not even over, and everything that could go wrong had gone wrong. He felt completely overwhelmed. His wife managed all of this every single day, and she did it with a smile. He looked around the messy kitchen. He looked at the crying baby in his arms. He thought about the spilled cider in the cellar and the pig with the full belly. He felt a new respect for his wife's work. It was not easy at all. It was complicated and required doing many things at once. His simple plan for an easy day had turned into a series of hilarious and frustrating failures. He knew he had to try to fix at least one thing before his wife came home from the fields. So the husband knew the cow needed to be taken to the meadow for water and some fresh grass, but he couldn't just leave the baby alone in the house, right? What could he do? He looked around and, well, had another one of his creative but honestly very silly ideas. You see, the cottage had a roof made of thick turf with lovely green grass growing on top. Aha! He thought, I will put the cow on the roof. She can eat the grass up there and I can stay inside with the baby. It really seemed like the perfect solution to his problem. So he found a long wide plank and leaned it against the side of the house, making a ramp up to the roof. He tied a rope around the cow's neck. Then he went inside the cottage. He dropped the other end of the rope down the wide chimney. His plan was to pull the cow up the ramp from inside the house. That way he could watch the baby and get the cow onto the roof at the same time. He tied the end of the rope around his own waist. Now he was connected to the cow. He felt super proud of his cleverness. He was sure this plan would work perfectly. The baby had finally stopped crying and was watching him with wide, curious eyes. He took a deep breath and began to pull on the rope, but the husband had forgotten one very important thing. The cow was much, much heavier than he was. As soon as the cow started walking up the plank, her weight pulled the rope tight. Instead of him pulling the cow up, the cow pulled him up. Whoosh! The husband was yanked off his feet and went straight up the chimney, his legs dangling. He was stuck inside the chimney, soot falling all around him. At the same time, the poor, confused cow was dangling from the edge of the roof, held only by the rope tied around her neck, and the husband stuck in the chimney on the other end. What a sight it was! A husband stuck in a chimney and a cow hanging from a roof. The pig was, just sleeping off its creamy breakfast in the mud. The chickens were clucking about the strange new decoration on the house. The baby sat in its cradle, giggling at the sight of its father's boots kicking in the fireplace. Everything was in chaos. The husband's simple day of easy chores had turned into a circus. He coughed from the soot and wiggled his legs, but he was completely and utterly stuck. He could only hope his wife would finish her hard work in the fields and come home soon. Just then, the wife was walking home from the fields. She was tired from cutting the hay, but she felt pretty good. As she got closer to the cottage, she saw a very strange sight. She saw her poor cow hanging in the air by the side of the house. Her eyes grew wide with alarm. She dropped the scythe and ran as fast as she could. She had to save her dear cow. She quickly took her sharp scythe and, with one swift slice, she cut the rope that was holding the cow. She thought this would solve the problem and let the cow gently down to the ground. With the rope cut, the cow tumbled safely onto a soft patch of grass below. "Moo!" she said, shaking her head as if waking from a strange dream. But inside the house, something else happened. When the wife cut the rope, there was nothing holding the husband up in the chimney anymore. Whoosh! Thump! He came tumbling down the chimney and landed right in the big pot of porridge that had been warming by the fire for his dinner. He sat there, covered from head to toe, in warm, sticky porridge, soot and, well, a whole lot of shame. He looked up just as his wife walked through the door. The wife stood in the doorway, her hands on her hips, but she was not angry. When she saw her husband sitting in the porridge pot looking so silly and sorry, she couldn't help but laugh. It was a warm, loving laugh. He looked so ridiculous that all she could feel was affection for him and his disastrous day. He looked back at her, his face a mess of porridge and soot, and he started to laugh too. They both laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks. The house was a mess, the butter was gone, but they were together and safe. That evening, after they had cleaned up the mess together, they sat by the fire. The husband held his wife's hand. "Your work is not easy," he said softly. "It is the hardest work of all. I will never complain again." The wife smiled and squeezed his hand. "And your work in the fields is hard too," she said. "I think we should stick to our own jobs from now on." The husband nodded eagerly. And from that day forward, they never ever argued about whose work was harder. They had learned to appreciate each other, and their little farm was a happier place than ever before.